time for us to check back in with the family history and stories of Opal Corn Myers. If you've missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. Special children. In all the time I taught in one-room schools, I only had one child who was retarded and couldn't learn the way other children did. This child lived where Roy Dan lives. At that time, there were 16 or 17 people living in that little cabin. It only has 2 rooms with a loft and a kitchen. I guess the children all shared the loft. I would have given anything if he could have received special education. I believe he could have learned a lot to help himself if there had been someone to work with him. After the schools consolidated and I worked at the school in Del Rio, a lot of the students acted like they were retarded because they wanted to get into special education classes. I called it social education because it was nothing but socializing. There was no special education to it. They just sat together in class doing crafts and things like that. Those classes are good for children who really need them, but only hurt those who are lazy or those who are just slow learners. I had a lot of slow learners or children from families that just never taught them anything before they started school. I would always give them special attention, not special education. I found out what they were good at and helped them feel good about themselves, and I taught the other students to respect all people. I had one little girl at Sand Hill whose parents told me, "I don't know what you'll do with Lois, 'cause she just can't stay in the house or sit still for long periods of time. She has to go outside and move around." I told the little girl, "That will be fine. We've got papers and trash out there that need picking up anyway. So when you get tired of sitting, Lois, you just go outside and pick up papers and bring them in and let me see how many you got." Pretty soon, she got to where she could stay in her seat as good as anybody else. When she had to pick up papers, she discovered sitting at her place wasn't too bad. It turned out that Lois would much rather be in school than work outside. The dirty little girl. There was this little 6-year-old girl that came to school so dirty it was pathetic. She smelled of stale urine so bad that the other students couldn't stand to sit by her. I don't know if she wet the bed at night or if some of the other children sleeping in the same bed did. Her parents never changed her clothes, not even her underwear. She slept in the same clothes she wore to school, and then she would wear them to school again the next day. I started bringing clothes for her to wear at school. When she got to school, I would take her into the kitchen and clean her up and put clean panties and clothes on her. When it's time for her to go home, I'd put her dirty clothes back on her. Sure enough, that little girl would show up again the next day in the same clothes. Sometimes when the sun was shining enough that it would dry her hair before she got home, I would get some of the 8th grade girls to take her outside and wash her hair. I just don't think the mother knew enough to keep her clean. The little girl was just as bright as she could be. After her mother died, when she was about 16, she went to Greenville to some of her mother's people. I hope they took better care of her. Teachers' aides. I had several mamas who would come and help me listen to the little ones read and say their ABCs and times tables. Usually they would stay the whole day. I had one mother that would come and stay whenever I needed her, and if I had to be off a day, she would teach the classes. I'll tell you, that was wonderful when something urgent came up. I didn't have to go through a lot of rigmarole finding a certified teacher. To be a certified teacher in a one-room school, you had to have 1 year of college, and to be a substitute, you were to be a high school graduate. But it wasn't easy finding someone with those credentials to come in on short notice. Somehow, God always provided for every occasion. 1944 through 1946, buying land. Sam, Ben's daddy, never owned land. Like everyone else, they did have a garden, but he really didn't want to work the land to raise larger crops grown for food or to barter with in town. Instead, he was content to work for someone else and earn just enough money to buy their food and the other things they needed. For a long time, Sam worked for a large landowner doing odd jobs, this and that. The landowner had what was called a company store on his property, where his workers could purchase food and other things on credit. That is why the Myers always had more variety in their food and ate more uppity than we did. But they never did have any money or any property of their own or anything else to show for it as far as that goes. They had biscuits and yeast bread when everyone else up here ate only cornbread. But when the due bill was deducted from Sam's pay, he hardly had any money left at all, barely enough to pay their rent. He worked all his boys the same way. As soon as John, Ben, Thomas, and Howard and Albert were big enough, he took them out of school and sent them out to work. Being young, they were hardly paid anything at all, and what they did earn was used up at the company store to buy food for the family. Those boys did all that hard work and never got any of the money for themselves. They never had anything. That's the reason all of them boys left home as soon as they got old enough to get a better job and make it on their own. I guess Ben was like Sam. He never saw the need of owning our own land. We had rented from the time we got married, but I had always had the dream of owning my own place. Desmer knew how much I wanted to own property, so when she heard her brother-in-law say that he was planning to sell the McMahan place, she could hardly wait to tell me. The place included a house and 50 acres of land. It began on the other side of the road from the mission house up there at my little toilet and went all the way up to the top of that mountain, all the way up to the click house, and then up in that hollow. Back when I was going to the mission school, before the government took back all the land leases and made the people move, there were dozens of families living back here in this community. Now there weren't many houses left at all. Coming up here on the old 15th, there were a couple of houses that could be seen from the road. A few more were back off the road about halfway up to the top of the mountain. Then there was the mission house, and across from it and down a little bit was the McMahan place. At the very end of the road, right up against the national forest, was the Click's cabin. Even the church schoolhouse was gone. We had decided back in the early 40s that it just made a whole lot more sense to move the church over to the Sand Hill School location down there next to the cemetery at Persimmon Hill. One of our biggest problems had been trying to conduct funeral services with the church and the cemetery that far apart. About the only thing we could do was have a graveside service, and in bad weather that was terrible for everyone. So we got permission from the Presbyterians to dismantle and rebuild the church at the new location. We used the old wood to rebuild, and the Presbyterians paid for the nails and other expenses like that. The pastor, who the Presbyterians were then sending up here to preach, and his sons, my papa, Ben, and a few others, did all of the work themselves. It really turned out to be very good for everyone because the church was much closer for most of the people and not all that far from us either. It was even closer for the preachers who lived in town. They for sure were glad they did not have to travel that last mile or so of road, which was still not much more than ruts and rocks. With the church in the new location, we were able to have funeral services in the church and then immediately take the casket out to the cemetery and have the burial. Well, I kept trying to get Ben to agree to buy the McMahan place, but he was not all that interested. He would just say, we don't need it." "Yes, we do," I declared. "What if something happens to you? What would Corinne and I do then? We don't know how long they'll let us rent the mission, and if they ever decide they don't want us living here anymore, there's no other place around here to rent. We can't go outside the community to find a place. We don't have a car, and that would be too far for me to walk to school. How would I teach then?" I kept after Ben about buying land, and finally I talked him into it. The land would cost us $1,100. That sounded to me like a whole lot of money. I was making $69 a month and only got paid 8 months out of the year. But I figured up that I could pay $200 a year on the land, and Mont's brother agreed. Before I finished paying for that property, the county started dividing our pay over 10 months. Buying that property was one of the best decisions we ever made. Just after Desmer and Mont moved back up here, Mama and Papa moved into that house, the old McMahon place, and they lived there until they died. It was good to be able to provide that for them. They had always done so much for us and for everyone else, too. Mission condemned. Ben left to go into the Army on February 14, 1944. He hadn't been gone hardly any time at all when one day, when I got home from teaching school at Sand Hill, there were 6 or 8 men waiting for me at the mission house. They were all dressed up in suits, and I didn't know what in the world they wanted. It turned out that they were big shots from the Presbyterian Church in Kingsport and wanted to see the mission. Why, that just worried me to death because I never did have time to keep things cleaned up and my beds made. Everything always seemed to be in a scattered mess or in dust-covered stacks of things that needed to be sorted. I told them, "You know, what with teaching school and everything else I do around here, I just don't have time to do housekeeping. Your housekeeping is not what we came here to see. We're establishing a summer camp program and want to inspect the mission house to see if it's suitable for that." That was rather interesting, I thought. We had already been doing that for years, and they're just now thinking of it? Why, how silly could they be? Maybe we should have asked for their permission, but it had never crossed my mind that we might need approval from any of the higher-ups. Whenever the preacher from town would tell us he wanted to bring a group, we would tell them to come on, and then we would get everything ready for them. I couldn't quite understand why they had to go through all this rigmarole now. Those men acted real uppity and snooty, high and mighty like. They shook their heads and made clacking sounds as they looked at the steps and around the outside of the house. When they went inside and looked around, they seemed to get more upset. I had never heard such fussy talk from grown men. The floor screeched and they panicked over it. "This building is dangerous. Law! 3 stories high, and listen to that. Do you hear that floor? Listen to that. This building is not at all safe. Not only will this not do for a summer camp, I'm afraid we'll have to have this mission house condemned." They said it wasn't even safe for me to live there, and that it should probably be torn down right away before someone got hurt. Why, I had lived there since 1935, nearly 10 years, and I had spent much of my childhood in the mission house. I owned the property across the road, and I could live there with Mama and Papa, but I didn't want to move, and I for sure didn't want it torn down. The mission was too important to me. I was so afraid I had to think of something. Maybe if I were willing to take it off their hands, then perhaps they wouldn't care about its condition. If I owned it, then there would be nothing they could do to the mission. So I just up and said, "Yeah, well, I'll pay you $500 for the mission." They said I could have it with certain stipulations and told me I would have to sign a 15-year contract saying that I would keep and take care of any Presbyterian preacher or worker who came to help out in the community. I thought it was strange that they would want their preachers and workers staying in such an unsafe place, but I guess safety wasn't such a big issue if the liability was mine and not theirs. Well, of course, that was just fine with me. I'd only been doing that most of my life. Since we first started renting the mission, we had always reserved a room for people who came to visit in the community, whether they were preachers, workers, or someone just needing a place to stay for a night or two. It was called the preacher's room, and even when Corinne was just a little girl, I told her not to go in there because it was a room for special guests to stay. It was the only room in the house that was always clean and the only room that had linoleum flooring. The linoleum went almost from wall to wall. All the other floors were just wood planks. There was a nice rug by the side of the bed and a vase on the table for flowers when a preacher or someone special came during warmer weather. Most of the families up here had more grown-ups and children than they had places for them to sleep, and there certainly was no extra place to put visitors if they should happen to have any. I was the only person up here who had something like that, you know, and I'd invite people all the time to stay with us. I always kept anyone who came to visit in the community that didn't have anywhere to spend the night. I always took them in, even the kinfolks of neighbors. I remember when Roy Dan's uncle came down from New York, he and his wife stayed up here with me so they could have a room by themselves. I guess I was a lot like Papa. We'll stop right there for today. She was a lot like Papa, wasn't she? If you remember, her Papa, her daddy, was always inviting people to stay with them at their house. And their house was teeny tiny compared to the mission. But still, he was very hospitable and wanted people to stay with him. He enjoyed having visitors. And it sounds like Opal was the exact same way. The very first part, of course, is heartbreaking and sad as she talks about the children who were maybe mentally handicapped, and then also the ones that just didn't have someone to care for them. And there was really no, like today, there's all these safety nets for situations like that, and certainly there's special education for people who need it, but it really tore at Opal's heart, and sounds like she'd done everything she could to help those type of children. Really sad about the little girl that, was dirty and just seemed like there was nobody to care for her. And even Opal even went so far as to bring her clothes, and then also to get the older girls to wash her hair. That's really, really touching. And then the land comes up for sale, and she just wants to own land so that it'll be hers and Ben's, and so they'll have a steady place instead of having to pay rent. Today it's the same. A lot of people would rather own their house than pay rent to someone. There are people who prefer to pay rent, though, and then they never have to worry about none of the kind of the upkeep and the things like that. But interesting that she finally convinced him. I think Opal would be, just the way we've got to know her through the book, I don't think you would be able to, if she come at you going to convince you of something, I don't think you'd be able to resist her. I think she would just keep on and on and on till you seen the light the way that she wanted you to. But then how nice and kind, once they did buy it, they let Mama and Papa move into it. So she says that's where they lived out the rest of their days, and that she was so glad that she could do that for them. She really took care of her parents. All through this, you can see her talking about them and worrying about them, and wanting to make sure that they were okay. And then right after that, it's Ben goes off to war. I wonder if I could look it up, but I didn't. Probably maybe the draft was still on. I don't know, 1944, but he had to join the army, so he had to leave. And then that left her and Corinne there by themselves. And then she comes home one day, and all the uppity, high and mighty, she says, men was there, and they start going through the mission and worrying about this and that. It is funny that they said they was wanting to have a summer camp, and Opal had already been doing that. She'd already kind of been doing her mission like she wanted to do, like she told God she would do, she felt led to do. And she'd been working with the Presbyterians, because that's the preacher that would come out to preach. So they were kind of just doing their own thing, and those higher-ups, as she called them, just didn't know all the stuff that was going on. So, but they'd come to check it out, and then they deemed the whole place was just about to fall down on their heads and was too dangerous. But I'm like Opal, it's really funny once they say it's dangerous and it needs to be condemned and tore down, and then she thinks, what am I going to do, and she offers to buy it, and they say, sure. And then they say, but if you buy it, then you have to promise, put in writing, stipulate that you will make sure that any Presbyterian ministers or mission workers that visit have a place to stay. And like Opal's saying, she's kind of like, I thought it was too dangerous, and now you want your people to stay in here? So that makes you wonder if they just wanted rid of it, if they just wanted to get rid of it, and maybe they thought it's too far out, it's done and served its purpose, that mission is over and we need to move on to other things. I don't know, but I'm glad that Opal was able to buy it. I thought it was real interesting when she talks about how they had the little preacher's room fixed up there. And she's talking about how she does keep it clean, and she had the little vase there so they could put flowers in it and make it all nice. But she says it had linoleum, and the rest of the house just had wooden planks, wooden boards for the floor. It's so interesting to think about the styles of times and changing. When I was a girl growing up in Granny Pap's house, we had no carpet. There's no carpet anywhere in the house. We had linoleum. That's what we had in all the bedrooms and in the kitchen and in the living room and all that. I was so embarrassed by it. I thought that to have a nice house, you had to have carpet. So I was just thought, oh, we're so poor, we can't even have carpet. Well, then when Matt and I got married, by that time, wood flooring was more in style, so we put wood flooring through all the house except the bathrooms and the bedrooms. The bedrooms had carpet, and then the bathrooms had linoleum. And it didn't take me long to realize, and the kitchen also has linoleum, or it has, now at this point it has some tile. It had linoleum then. But anyway, it didn't take me long to realize, oh my goodness, those floors like Granny had in her house was so much easier to keep clean than the carpet, especially with 2 little girls. So at this stage, all of the carpet's been pulled out of our house except what's in mine and Matt's bedroom. And if we ever, it's not that we're attached to it, we'd want it pulled out too, but it's just never happened yet. But it's just funny how those things change. Like at this stage in life, or modern, not really stage in life, I should say, today, in today's modern world, those old wooden planks is what people would want, not the linoleum. But Opal thought the linoleum was the special store-bought stuff, and that's why she saved it for that special room for preachers or for important people that might come. I thought that was really, really interesting. Opal, through all the book, but even in this part, you can just see her heart, how she just wanted to help people, and she wanted to teach them to do better. And she was talking about maybe the mentally handicapped people there, if she could have just taught them, whatever it was they were good at, to be good at that, and to be happy and to be proud of themselves. And she taught the other students to treat them nicely. She just wanted to better them. She wanted to teach that little girl about hygiene and keeping yourself clean, and I'm sure she did make an impression on all those people. And then there at the mission, she was just willing to take in whoever. Now, she probably was like Papa in that she liked to have visitors and liked to have company. But he was probably the same way too, though. There was a goodness in that, though. If someone, if I was having company come from far off, but I didn't have room, and then my neighbor said, hey, they can stay at my house, I have plenty of room. There's a real generosity in that, a real charitable aspect of that. So she was doing that too, even if she did just like to have people around and have visitors. She was certainly doing that too, helping out her community and helping out, of course, the church, the Presbyterians there. I thought it was interesting too how they took down the church, just kind of dismantled it, and then put it back together and put it up where it's close to the cemetery to make it easier on everyone. Of course, our churches today are not built like that. In those days, they were so simply built that you could just deconstruct and then reconstruct, It's interesting to think about them doing that, and that they got it put back, and how much better that was for everyone. Just like so many other parts of this book, just such a different time, but a very precious time. And I'm so thankful that Opal made sure her story was documented, and so eternally thankful to Barbara for doing this labor of love and making sure that it was put into book form so we could enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed today's reading. Please leave a comment and tell me what jumped out at you, and I hope you'll drop back by next Friday so we can see what happens to Opal next.